This is so wonderful to see so many people. Thank you so much for coming. It's really brilliant. So I know lots of you and I don't know lots of others of you. I'm Kate Conway. I run Suzuki Hub in London, and I've organised this to start us off with a Suzuki book club, which is something I've been meaning to do for many years. I think a lot of us are finally getting around to things that we've been meaning to do for a long time. So this is so wonderful to have you all and to be able to discuss this very important book and the philosophy behind it. So I think I just wanted to talk very briefly about why I wanted to start this book club and what I hope for the afternoon. I think you know, in these very stressful times, we have many of us, if not all of us, have really come back to the philosophy that brings us together in the first place. And we're all very aware that Dr. Suzuki developed his method as a response to what he saw in the lives of the Japanese children as immense hardship post-war. And these are not the same kind of difficult times, but very difficult times for all of us. And I think in that moment, we come back to what keeps us together and what motivates us to do our work. And I'm sure I speak for many of us when I say that I feel immensely privileged to have such important work and such pleasurable work, even over Zoom, to do in these times, because it's a great pleasure to still be making music with my students and with my colleagues. I think that the distancing, whether you're talking social distancing just 1 meter, 2 meters apart in public, or literally not being able to see friends and family who live further away from you, has led us all to crave a closeness, and that we want to bring connections back into our lives. And I think that the internet is the most amazing tool for doing that. And really, in some ways, I've felt much more connected with colleagues and friends in this time than previously, because things like this would never have occurred to me to make it online and international. Before, I would have just done it at Suzuki Hub because that's where I do my work. But actually having the opportunity to come together from anywhere in the world, slightly dependent on time zone, is really amazing and a wonderful thing to take advantage of. And I think the thing I wanted to say about Dr. Suzuki is that every time I discuss him and his work, I am reminded of how often he wanted to try something new. And I think there would be so many things about this that he would think is so exciting, and the technology and the opportunity to share videos, to make recordings digitally, remotely, to play together over the internet, even though we're not even in the same town. I think a lot of these things would be immensely exciting to him. And of course it's really difficult, and lots of us wish that it had never happened, and I think that's completely understandable. But I also think it's I don't know, it tickles me to think that Dr. Suzuki would get a lot out of this and actually think that some things about this were amazing, and I'm trying to hold on to that for myself. So I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to introduce, I would like to say thank you to Ed. Well, I'd like to say thank you to everyone, but Ed introduced me to this way of introducing people, which apparently comes from Carrie Beth Hockett, who I love very much, and I wish she were here and I wish I could see her. But thank you for that. And so I would like to introduce the lovely Sue Bird, who is a piano teacher. I've known her, I think, my whole life, had the great pleasure of working with her, and she is going to introduce the next member of the panel.
Hello, everybody. It's really wonderful to be here, and thank you so much, Kate, for giving us all the opportunity to discuss Nurtured by Love today. It is absolutely marvellous to see such wonderful people that we have here speaking and discussing Nurtured by Love. I think I can just mention only a few words. Beautiful tone with living soul. It really, that captures for me the essence of Dr. Suzuki. He wanted so much from those children. For me, I was actually 15 when I experienced my first, my goodness, that sound. I love that sound. I was listening to a pianist playing in the Chopin piano competition in Warsaw, and she was playing a Chopin impromptu, and literally the first note drew me in, and it gave me funny feelings in my tummy, and I just felt absolute love and devotion and this music. Is it just the music? No, it's not. It's that living, wonderful soul that she had in her playing. Well, I hadn't discovered it even then in my playing. I went on much, much later to discover that quality, and I'm still searching for that quality now. And having had years of studying and then going on to music college and wondering what it was, this search for tone, and then by chance an injury, a hand injury, and stumbling across the Suzuki method and meeting Ruth, and within 24 hours I had come to my senses through the twinkle variations, playing Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, and discovering, I see. I didn't know it then, because it takes years of searching to find that living tone that we're so keen on. And we have the most wonderful opportunity with small children. They have such a head start, and this wonderful approach to learning that Dr. Suzuki dedicated his whole life for. I think it's absolutely marvelous that we can do this with 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds. So for me, at this particular time, and through Zoom and other ways of communicating with families, I think it's just a great opportunity to work on the environment, let's put lots of music into our lives. Let's really be touched by these small children. Let's set ourselves up to really foster what Dr. Suzuki really wanted. It's the small steps that we want to acknowledge, and from the small steps breeds success, and then another success. So for me, when I was doing my studying, I wasn't playing Paganini studies and Chopin etudes. For me, I felt it was just the most wonderful opportunity to do something in such a simple way, to play a twinkle variation. And I'm very, very grateful to this. I'm very grateful to Ruth for showing me this, the sincerity of Dr. Suzuki. So how do we go about creating this wonderful musical environment? Through review. Reviewing our pieces. Well, it's not just reviewing pieces, it's learning all the skills that build up towards making that beautiful piece of music, and to be able to have the courage to then go and perform it. So the memory that these children are discovering for themselves through the system of review is just a phenomenal opportunity. And all from one source, from nurturing through love for these children. So let's surround ourselves with a lot of music. All of the books, we can be listening to all of the books and review. For me, over the course of the next week, every day I have set up a review half hour of books 1 to 6 with my pupils, and for anybody else who would like to join in, because I know that the children love this. Once they start off through Twinkle Twinkle and they work all the way through the book, just reviewing just for pianists, that is, just one hand, that really stimulates and relaxes them as well. And then they grow in confidence, and they start to feel so good. Their self-esteem just brims over. They feel wonderful, and that's what we want them to feel like. And we, that a performance is, it's wonderful to celebrate that performance, but actually to celebrate a skill and to celebrate, oh, that little finger is just so fabulous, and did you hear that tone? Did you enjoy, that? I absolutely loved the tone that you made. Those are the really, really wonderful things, and I'm so grateful to Dr. Suzuki for that. I had no understanding whatsoever that it was all narrowed down to one thing. So for me, beautiful tone with living soul, that is carrying me through this pandemic. And I'd like to invite Ruth now to talk to us all. She is a real inspiration, and she has dedicated her life to this beautiful tone with living soul. She has accompanied Dr. Suzuki in his last stages, been his main translator, and really has the essence of Dr. Suzuki for us all to enjoy. So hello and welcome, Ruth.
Thank you very much. I don't really quite know what to say. Dr. Suzuki's spirit is what is bringing us all together. It is such an interesting concept. I was speaking to a wonderful colleague and friend in Japan. I just mentioned to Shozo Matsumoto, who's a fantastic violin teacher in Conway, that we were doing the Suzuki book club thing. And he said, oh, it must be so wonderful to speak to colleagues about Dr. Suzuki's philosophy, because, for example, on his little business card, Japanese always have business cards, yes, with who they are, and usually there are lots of things on it. And on his, it was very simple: Suzuki violin teacher, and Suzuki graduated from the Suzuki philosophy. And I thought that was I haven't ever seen that before on someone's business card. I graduated from the Institute in study of philosophy of Suzuki method. So I feel I'm very privileged to be able to share even a very small part of, not myself really, well, Dr. Suzuki within me. It's a difficult time for many people here during the pandemic, but we are trying to teach tone, so that is a huge challenge for us to do that online. But I think if the children have had, and the parents understand the basic tenets of the philosophy, this is what will keep them going. I've actually had students coming back to me, teenagers or young adults in university, who have contacted me to say that they're playing the piano again, because we're in Barcelona and we've been in a very severe lockdown, and it has become a fulfilling thing for them to do, to go back to their instrument. I was looking at these two versions we have. You know, we have the Nurtured by Love, and then we have the one wonderful version by Lily Selden and Kyoko Selden, her mother. And just thinking that these are books which have accompanied me my entire life. I was, perhaps when I went to Japan, I had much less idea of what it was to be a Suzuki teacher than many of you, because I had never taught traditional before, and I'd never met Dr. Suzuki before I went. So to me, to first come across this book, it's been something that I think can bring a lot of comfort to people and realization. Dr. Suzuki often said on his videos as well, and the teaching videos, guidance videos, you know, I have many faults. This is Dr. Suzuki speaking about himself very openly to the teachers and parents. I have faults, but I can only work on one of them at a time. So this idea is something that has really stayed with me my entire life, is that he has, by his own example, not by what he's said, but more by what he's lived, he's been able to inspire personally, inspire me, and also he is my dreaded voice of conscience in whatever I do. I cannot get away from Dr. Suzuki and the conscience that he instilled in me of not lying to myself, which is from Tolstoy, not lying to other people, even if it's more convenient, just a little tiny one. I cannot do it anymore, and so I suffer a lot, but this is what Dr. Suzuki did for me. Also, Dr. Suzuki as a person, I think in these times, what we would really want to do is not only to talk about this philosophy. It's really nice to be together with like-minded people. This is a wonderful thing. But what I admire are the people. I'm not always one of them. I'm the victim of my kind of Japanese American upbringing, where silence is golden, and don't say what you think about other people, and don't create waves. But I'm learning by Dr. Suzuki's example to come through that, to talk openly to people. If we only stay within our own group, we cannot then share the real essence of the philosophy. When we studied in Japan, I think one of the first things we learned is, as you all know, is how much we didn't know. And so there was this huge moment of shock that it's not just one child who happens to be playing well. It's not just two that are showcased the way we might have in our own studios. It's all the children, because all children have ability. And so Dr. Suzuki's method was really no fail method, because no child fails to speak his mother tongue. Even though we may not all, as he said himself, we may not all get to the same level. So after that initial shock, Dr. Suzuki spent most of his time very kindly, and sometimes not so kindly, stripping away those layers of ego, one by one, getting us to really come down to the essence of who we were and to admit that we needed to learn something else, which is the first step towards self-realization, is to understand that to be self-realized, we have to see that we need to work on ourselves. So Dr. Suzuki was always encouraging us to serve other people, to be in service to other people. Of course, his English was simple, but it was incredibly direct. And in Japanese, of course, it was even stronger. I'm sure he had moments of desperation too, of trying to handle all his teachers and understanding that we are only human beings. So as human beings, we are subject to the same little jealousies and desires for power and desires to be the best. But Dr. Suzuki kept asking his teachers, please research, please work together, for one reason, for the good of the children of the world. That is a very large goal, and it wasn't his only goal. His other goal was, of course, for the good of the world. So I remember once walking with him, we were in Sweden, and we had to go through a graveyard, a little cemetery, to go to the church. And he said to me, when I die, I'm not going to heaven, I'm going to hell. And when I get there, I will speak to Lucifer and I will ask him to stop all wars. And I realized that the depth of his philosophy at that time was he had unattainable goals, which is why he was working with children, because adults were already a little twisted by our environment and children are pure. So that really, to me, sums up what we should be doing in Suzuki method is I have to be a personal example to the best of my ability to my students and to my parents. I can't just have a few hours or a month of parent-teacher training and expect that everybody's going to pick it up, because it's years and years and years of practice. I am not allowed to give up on the parent that I consider to be my worst Suzuki parent because they never show any interest in anything, because I never know when the spark is going to come through or why they need to be there. It's not up to me to judge them. I just have to do what Dr. Suzuki said, which is don't give up for the first 10 years. Keep trying, keep working, and don't judge. You have no right to judge. So that is really, when Dr. Suzuki talked about the life force, he worked exclusively with the life force, inspired by the great musicians of his time. The great musicians he chose for us as examples were also people that humanely we could look up to, because the more you're in contact with a higher source than yourself, the greater your feeling becomes, and no one can be force-fed anything. We can talk about it, but what I feel is a huge responsibility personally is to not allow myself to slip back and take the easy way. That's why, as I said, Dr. Suzuki, this is what his secretary said once after he died and they were trying to prepare another conference. She said, oh yes, Dr. Suzuki is always sitting on my shoulder, smiling and watching. And at great times of great sort of desperation in my own life, actually, Dr. Suzuki has come to me sometimes in my dreams and just been there for me. So it's living it. So Dr. Suzuki, it was actions. It was all about actions. It was not about the words. Words are easy, and living the actions is something that we have to learn over and over and over again. And we have a perfect way of doing it. As my great colleague Kuhn said, if everybody were nice people, we would have no chance to practice how to be nice to other people who aren't. So I try to remember that in working with the parents as well. It takes patience and it takes time, but I would hope that this idea of the living soul will help people through a very difficult time. I think my time is up. Is that right?
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Ruth.
So I would like to introduce Mauro Biancoleveren. I can't hear this down on the bottom of the screen. Mauro Biancoleveren is a very wonderful colleague of mine. He is a Suzuki guitar teacher from Turin in Piedmonte in Italy. And I asked if he could be invited because he translated and then became a co-translation. The other book that I hope maybe you might be using, this is the ability development from age 0. So we have an Italian translation. So
The
I
5th of
thought
July. We'll be doing it on the 5th of July.
great. Okay, so I would like to hand over to Mauro. Thank you.
Well, so again, what can I say? Because Rolf, particularly, and Kate, and again, sorry, Sue, was so it was such a nice way of starting this meeting from Sue. I really like what you said, Sue, and absolutely, Rolf, you know, she was so much in touch with Dr. Suzuki directly, and of course, she said good things, I have to say too. And out of what I heard until now, let me just use one single, let's say, point. First of all, sorry for my absolutely not great English, but I'm, you know, so I'm not exactly as good in talking in Italian, you can imagine in English, which is not my language, you know. So the human side, let me say, I just took a note while listening, and the human side of a Suzuki teacher, I took this note some minutes ago. So I think this is the point. I don't know if it is correct to say in English, the core of the subject, the core of this thing called Suzuki method. So I'm not here to teach anything to anybody, to such wonderful colleagues, and then too many. If I say something wrong, I will get myself in a trouble with so many people. Listen to me, but still, I really think that what did Dr. Suzuki do in the end? Did he invented anything or developed something for for developing a musician? No. Then of course his method was so wonderful that we had so many great musicians, you know, among his students. I was so pleased and so lucky to meet with one of them. And my God, I was surprised of the depthness of that directly, let's say, I don't want to say disciple because it may sound a religious word, but in a certain way, to be in contact and for many years with Dr. Suzuki, well, it is something that is pretty close to become a sort of disciple, but not a blind disciple, because it's love. The basement, as we say in Italy, is love, you know, and then you build your house on that. So Dr. Suzuki didn't, as you well know better than me, he didn't really invent this to create professionals. Probably either not to invent musicians at all. It was a tool, what he developed, a tool. Nothing else than a tool to reach something higher. If I can use a word which is slightly spiritual, if you want, but it gives the idea of what I have in mind, I would say to reach the spiritual side of each human being. I'm not talking about religion, just spiritual side, you know, no matter a person may be, you know, a believer or not, but still he has, I think, a spiritual side. And well, I got interested in the Suzuki method exactly because I noticed that some teachers develop a lot that side. And that was so interesting for me. Then through the years, now probably not as many as Ruth or I don't know, others of you, but among you, but still in about 30 years in being involved in the Suzuki worldwide family, you know. well, I've been able to discover many things, of course, and like everything that you discover, some you may like, some you may not like so much. So to be positive, let me say that I think that sometimes we, and I'm talking to my cell phone first, of course, really, to my cell phone first. Sometimes we forget a little what a Suzuki method, what is the goal of a Suzuki, what is the Dr. Suzuki's goal? Was to develop not a musician, not the ability of moving the fingers on an instrument, no matter how wonderfully, but to develop the spiritual side of a person, to become a better citizen, he used to say. So that is the point. So it is great, and referring to something that Ruth said before, in just a little in a sentence, it's nice to hear and to read Dr. Suzuki's book, like Nurtured by Love. Wow, fantastic book, isn't it? But sometimes may happen that because we are caught in this society with everything is fast, much faster than as it was in Dr. Suzuki's time. So we are not in the best position, naturally, let's say, because we have to do too many things. Everything is supposed to be fast, otherwise we are always late and all these things. No? So sometimes we need time to detach from the world and to go inside us. And I think the Suzuki philosophy is fantastic, but it is fantastic when it is put in practice for real. Not only, it's nice to before going to bed to read a wonderful book about Dr. Suzuki. Oh, what wonderful pages, wonderful sentences, fantastic. Then you sleep very well, no nightmares at all. In the morning you have a nice breakfast, and then little by little you forget to put in practice in your everyday life what you read just the night before, because it's painful. Because mostly it's painful to put in practice those things. It shouldn't be, but because of our ego, I'm not talking about you personally, of course. I only know Ruth personally, and neither not anybody else here in this wonderful gathering of fantastic people. But I mean, speaking in general, okay. So this is something that I notice sometimes, and unfortunately, I think that somebody else noticed that in me too. So, but being so kind not to tell me, I don't know, but still, I think that I'm doing exactly the same mistake as many others. So, I think we have to try to not to forget what Dr. Suzuki said, of course, but to try to forget to be just on the surface of the Suzuki method and its real meaning. Is to change a person to become a better citizen, to become a better person, first of all. And then through that, to change the society. So music, of course, we are musicians. Of course, it's important. It would be something absolutely strange to say that music is not important. But I'm sure you caught what I'm trying to say in my very poor English. That yes, we are musicians, and so we use music and instruments. But that shouldn't be our goal. I want to be honest. When I have good students playing well the guitar with a nice tone on the guitar, what a problem. Okay, but I don't want to devote my talk. But still, when I have some students of mine, I'm honest, that reach that tone that I like, that I think could be closer to what Dr. Suzuki would have liked. Well, I feel fine. Honestly, I feel satisfied, of course, as a student of mine with this tone. Come on, it's great. Huh? Yes, this is human. I don't mean it's wrong. It may become wrong when this is too much, when it's always only that is in our mind, when our satisfaction, and I will finish with these few words, when our satisfaction as Suzuki teachers will come only through listening how fast our students can play without making a single mistake. Probably in that case, we should stop and coming back home to try to have some more free time for us. And well, I'm a yoga follower, so I was going to say, and to meditate a little, but everybody can meditate a little. And to think deeply at a real deeper level, am I right in doing this? What did I do today? I played well, great. And what did I say to that person asking me a favor? I said, I'm sorry, I can't because I'm in a hurry. So in that case, I have to say, I'm not a Suzuki teacher at all. Sorry for my bad English, but I just try to, to give a glimpse of what I have in mind. It's not so easy to say it in Italian. Again, as I said before, you can't imagine for me to try to convey that in English.
Your English is wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you to all of you. Thank you very much to all of you.
And thank you for your wonderful introduction. I would like to continue with what my colleague Mauro was saying about Dr. Suzuki's philosophy regarding kindness, because you're absolutely right. Suzuki is not just about training people to play music. I came to Suzuki a very long time ago. I can't remember a time when I didn't play violin or Twinkle Variations. And when I came back to it in my early 20s as a teacher in training, one of the things that really struck me was the kindness that Dr. Suzuki shows in his method and the kindness that Suzuki teachers show. That we're not just training instruments, we are training people to be kind and people to be patient and to persevere, even if what they are trying to do is difficult. And that's not something that we see when we're children, but that's something that we see very much as teachers of children, as something that Dr. Suzuki shows throughout his book. I will talk more about how we can do that as teachers in a little bit, but I would like to introduce our next speaker, Ed Sprunger. He is a violin teacher from the United States in St. Louis, Missouri.
Hi, I'm on, right? You can hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay. All right. Thanks, everybody. I just think it's wonderful that everybody's here and sharing their thoughts. And really, maybe in some sense, none of us have to say anything. We just need to be together and look at each other. It's so nice to be together. I actually have written out comments so I don't stray and can kind of keep to some kind of time constraint. I'll talk to you later, but right now I want to read myself and stay on point. So a big thank you to Kate, by the way, for putting this together, because I needed it. I didn't realize how much I needed it until I got it. And the past 2 weeks I've been reading, I've been rereading Suzuki's Nurtured by Love. But it might be that I'm reading Nurtured by Love for the first time, because this is the first time for me to read it in the translation by Lillian Kyoto Selden. The original English translation was done in the 1960s by Valtraud Suzuki because she felt the job needed to get done, so she pulled together a team to get it done. While it is a lovely translation, the new translation was taken up in order to correct some misconceptions and inaccuracies in the first English translation. Anyways, in reading this translation, this time, 3 things really stuck out to me. And they are: 1, the emphasis Suzuki places on work. Number 2 is his robust definition of love. And number 3 is how really radical his ideas were, and indeed still are. These 3 qualities, work, love, and his radical thinking, are all captured in his story about his student Teiichi. Suzuki writes, "One morning, the oil painter Tanaka Sanekazu appeared with a letter of reference from a friend of mine, holding the hand of a charming little boy. The boy was blind." First of all, let me just say that that is stunning writing. The boy was blind. Suzuki gets right to the point, and he goes on to tell us what the father of this boy said. "This is my son Teiichi. He's 5. His eyes were afflicted when he was an infant, and because his life was at risk, my wife and I had his eyes removed. As parents, we want to shine at least one light in our child's life to brighten the darkness. Music would be just the thing, we thought, so I'm here to request violin instruction for him." Tears came to my eyes when I looked at the young Teiichi, destined to grope his way through life, seated before me. So Suzuki is telling us that he was really moved. He felt for this boy. And I would imagine that he also felt for the parents. I mean, what must it be like to have to decide, what must it be like to have to decide to save your child's life by removing his eye? I would imagine that the parents felt a tremendous sense of guilt in spite of being guilty of nothing other than having to face an unfaceable, painful choice. Suzuki's heart goes out to the family, but he responds to the father's request not by saying, sure, I'll do it, but with a response that comes from a more robust definition of love. He writes, I was wholly inexperienced when it came to his special needs. I could not bring myself on the spot to accept him as a student. What's Suzuki doing here? Why doesn't he say yes right away? I think it's because he is thinking bigger than his own feeling of wanting to do something. Instead, he gives the matter some thought, some serious thought. He realizes that the first thing the boy is going to need from him is his mind. Suzuki's mind. The first thing a child needs is the teacher's mind. How a teacher understands what's going on will determine how the teacher proceeds. For example, if you have a student playing B naturals instead of B flats in two grenadiers, you'll take the lesson in one direction if you think it's a key signature problem, and in another direction if you think it's caused by lack of listening. Of course, if you think it has to do with the child's use of his left hand, you'll go in yet another direction. I think you get what I'm talking about. Anyway, Suzuki is taking some time to organize his mind. As he often told us when I was a Kinkyusei, the teacher must can. It doesn't mean that the teacher has to know everything, but it does mean that the teacher can't help the student beyond the teacher's own understanding. Suzuki gets curious and he sets about understanding what life is like for this boy. And he writes, that night, after settling down in my study, I thought about the difficult question posed to me that day of how to teach violin to a sightless child. I was completely at a loss. From the outset, it was something I could never have figured out simply by mulling it over. After a while, however, an idea occurred to me. Why, of course, I need to place myself in the situation of the blind before thinking any further. I rose and shut off the light. So this is Suzuki all in. He's wanting to understand the child's world. He sits in the darkness and then ends up playing his own violin in the dark with his eyes closed, and he discovers that it goes well. And he writes, this was a true revelation. I realized that we are not dependent upon our physical eyes. We play music with the sensory power we call kan, or intuition. When, after innumerable hours of training, an ability develops enough to be part of it, we begin to act in all areas by means of the workings of our life forces, a staggering power that unconsciously functions within us, or stated differently, that we call intuition. For that very reason, I realized I was able to play with impediments, even though I had put myself in a world where I was unable to see. Here we have an example of Suzuki's emphasis on work. He writes, when after innumerable hours of training, the intuition, the kan that he values is not the result of magic, it's of innumerable hours of training. So work, he values work. Suzuki then decides that he can begin to work with this blind child. And at the first meeting with the parents, he says, I'd like to propose that we use our combined strengths and try our hardest to open up Teiichi's mind's eye. I also requested that Mr. and Mrs. Tanaka prepare themselves to make Herculean efforts and to persevere to the end. Suzuki is not setting himself up as the all-knowing teacher. He is forming an alliance with the parents, and he's saying it will not be easy. We're back to that work ethic. He tells the parents, prepare themselves to make Herculean efforts and to persevere to the end. He gradually introduces the bow and teaches the boy how to make a bow hand. He doesn't know how his assignments will go, but the family perseveres, and Suzuki tells us, Teiichi's homework gradually increased in complexity. The following anecdote portrays the scene of one of our practice sessions. This time, let's play a game. We're going to catch the tip of our bow with the left hand, all right? Now, hold the bow in your right hand. You can see the very tip-top end, yes? Yes! Now then, try to catch that tip with your left hand. Here's the tip of your bow. When you catch it, you mustn't grope for it. Grasp it in one motion. Do you think you can do it? Go ahead now and catch it. Amused, Teiichi gave it a try. but his left hand wound up grabbing in an unexpected direction. As he happily played over and over again without success, his parents gazed, as if in prayer, at their son's hand. Finally, his left hand was able to grasp the tip. Suzuki is filling us in on the parents' anxiety. As he happily played over and over again without success, his parents gazed as if in prayer at their son's hand. I myself had a lesson this week in which a student was struggling with something new, and I didn't take for granted that his mother was able to tolerate her son's frustration. I'm sure we've all taught lessons in which the parents, or we ourselves, are not able to tolerate the child's frustration. I can imagine that if you're the parent of a child whose eyes you decided to have removed, the pressure for your child to have smooth sailing from there on out must be enormous. But Suzuki is going for something bigger. He says to the child that has just caught the tip of the bow, "Marvelous. The next step is to catch the tip 5 times in a row without missing. Let's make this your homework for the next time." This was the start of a game that was extremely interesting to the sightless child. Nevertheless, to grasp the tip 5 times in a row was no mean achievement. Even if he succeeded 4 times, failing the 5th attempt meant that he had to start over again. In the course of repeating this endeavor, however, Teiichi made steady progress. "You can see the tip, right?" Whenever I asked him, he invariably answered, "Yes, I see it." So, Suzuki is hanging in there with this kid. He remains the teacher. And the teacher in him says, "You will need more than 4 times in a row." But make no mistake, Suzuki's mind and heart are still working. He writes, "What does it really mean to see?" As Teiichi's little mouth, belonging to a child with no knowledge of the world as seen through the eyes, answered thus in its innocence, his voice moved me to sudden tears from time to time. It's not that Suzuki isn't deeply moved. He is. But he refuses to take care of his own tears by pretending that this child has developed a skill as well as Suzuki thinks the boy needs to. This is a huge challenge for us as Suzuki teachers. Too often we have a need to make the child happy so that we can feel like we're doing a good job. Suzuki resists this urge to make these lessons be for him. As he writes elsewhere in Nurtured by Love, "It feels to me that when parents question whether a child will amount to anything, that behind the question lurks an unwholesome view of the child as potentially a usable thing, or worse, a profitable thing." Suzuki's not wanting adults to profit off of children. In other words, he's anti-exploitation. Undeterred by the struggle, Suzuki eventually moves to a bigger challenge for the boy. He writes, "I believe that once he had accomplished that, he would be able to follow his intuition wherever it took him." This assignment isn't for Suzuki. It's so that once the skill is learned, the boy will be able to, quote unquote, follow his intuition wherever it took him. At another place in Nurtured by Love, Suzuki writes about a shift from education that teaches to education that fosters. He's interested in more than teaching the next piece. The current piece and the next piece are just tools for teaching other, more important things. But back to the story of Teiichi. Suzuki continues to work on Teiichi's side. He wants to help the kid develop a deeper sense of intuition and gives him bigger and bigger challenges. Suzuki writes about the boy's last challenge. His next assignment then was to practice hitting his left thumb with the tip of the bow, to strike that small a point. My thought was that once he was capable of doing this, it meant that he had truly come to see the tip. The family toils on, and then Suzuki writes, "The laborious nature of this particular assignment for the Tanaka family can be surmised from the first aside that Mr. Tanaka ever let out. This last homework was more difficult than usual. We had a tough time with it." That was the end of the first week. But 2 weeks later, Teiichi was able to meet his thumb 2 or 3 times out of 5. "Let me try too," I offered. I was certain it would be effortless for me, being sighted. I carefully took aim, then tried to hit my left thumb with the bow. but my tip swerved in the air, failing to connect with my left thumb. I tried again and failed a second time. When I finally succeeded, my heart ached. I had assigned a sightless child only 5 years old to do what even I, a sighted person accustomed to wielding the bow, was unable to do. Not only that, I had assigned him to practice it daily for 2 weeks. What a cruel experience I had put him through. Wow. This is Suzuki telling us that he'd done the kid wrong. He shows us the value of admitting it and the value of repair. It's not that we won't make mistakes as teachers, we will. Suzuki is showing us the value of noticing and evaluating. I love the line in the Suzuki Teacher Pledge that talks about pledging to teach with much reflection. It's stunning. Earlier this week, I was in a similar situation with a student. I'm sure you were too, where I had to once again ask myself if the kid I was teaching needed me to continue to insist that he toil away at what he was working at, or if I needed to come up with a different approach. Stated another way, he needed consistency. My student needed consistency from me, but I was worried that I was offering rigidity. These are the challenges we struggle with. Suzuki did too. Suzuki and Teiichi's family carry on. Suzuki writes, "There is no way to describe his efforts as anything but deeply moving and often grueling." So Suzuki was moved by Teiichi's life, but he didn't allow himself to be sentimental. At another point in Nurtured by Love, he writes, "I don't object to sorrow in and of itself. Human life is sorrowful, after all. But with love, life can be also a thing of pleasure and beauty. Can we not face the heartbreak in life by comforting one another?" As I said earlier, Suzuki was interested in something much bigger than finishing the book or getting to the next piece. He quotes a quote from Suzuki, "While impressions from landscapes may fade when we become used to them, delightful and elevated interactions among humans remain in our hearts permanently." In this story, we can certainly see a deep love Suzuki has for Teiichi and his parents, and we can see the way Suzuki holds to his idea of the importance of work. But what of the third thing I said I was impressed with on this reading of Nurtured by Love? His radical ideas. What's radical about helping a blind child learn to play the violin? Nothing really in 2020, but dial it back to when this happened. In what, the late 40s, the 1950s? Historically, blind people were shunned into trades or taught skills to live off of, but not artistic pursuits. This is something I was discussing with Lily Selden, the translator, last night. So I was really happy to learn this. And what about a man who's writing that every child can be educated? Every child, no exceptions for race, gender, economic status, etc. Every child. He's spouting these ideas back in the 1940s, just after millions were incinerated in the Holocaust because of their background. South Africa had apartheid from 1948 to the early 1990s. The United States had segregated schools until 1954. And we also had, here in the US, we also had states with segregation laws until 1965. Some would say we still have segregation, only in a different hidden form. And I happen to agree. In Nurtured by Love, Suzuki writes, "I make a point of discussing national policies for childcare when mingling with thoughtful legislators and financiers who possess the wealth and position to realize my ideas. Indeed, this was my primary and deeply felt motivation in starting the talent education movement." And I think in his own polite, understated Japanese way, what Suzuki is saying is, all children have enormous potential. So why the hell aren't we helping all children?
Thank you very much, Ed. Hannah, over to you.
Thank you, Kate. Here in America, I think I've had enough coffee to be articulate now. And I would like to discuss Suzuki's philosophy regarding the parent as the home teacher and the home environment in this weird time of online teaching that I'm sure none of us signed up for initially. Dr. Suzuki viewed the parent as an active participant in music lessons, calling them the home teacher rather than the practice parent. He says that children are really educated in the home so that in order for the child to have good posture, to practice properly at home, it's necessary for the parent to have firsthand experience. He also notes that he has his parents practice violin for about 3 months before the child plays anything. As modern teachers, we probably teach pre-twinkle a little bit different than Dr. Suzuki. First of all, I can't find any examples in his book where he started a child on a box or a pre-bow. Instead, he starts the parent and tells the child, just watch, come to group class, observe. He says until the parent can play one piece, the child does not play at all. And I think this sort of active learning on the part of the home teacher is one of the most important things we can take away from Dr. Suzuki's book. Now, I'm not saying we should make our overwhelmed working full-time practice parents also learn an instrument. But there is a huge benefit, especially now that we're teaching online, of having our parents play some violin or the child's instrument as well. Dr. Suzuki says that the child will take a violin away from his mother after seeing her practice daily, thinking, I want to play too. He knows the tune already. He also reminds us that the child will imitate the posture and the technique that he sees. In this vein of having our parents play some violin, one thing that I've personally observed teaching small children is how three-dimensionally they want to view the world around them. Every time I demonstrate a new song or a new technique, they don't stay still. They will bob around, wanting to see every angle of what is her hand doing? Where is her thumb? What's happening underneath? And this is one of the challenges of teaching young children online. For adults and older children, we're very used to viewing above and in front. We're used to staying still and seeing one angle, but little kids don't do this. And with screen teaching, I know if I keep contorting around to show every angle of my hand to the camera, my back's gonna hurt by the time I'm done with the day. So instead of us being responsible for that, we can show our parents how to play these techniques so that their children can see them from every angle, even if they're not as skilled as their children at playing. And there is great value to this. In my own studio, I recently showed the mother of one of my 6-year-olds how to vibrate. She's not a violinist, she's a pianist. But her son was getting very frustrated with taking verbal instructions from me on starting vibrato. So gave his violin to his mother. And I showed her how to vibrate on his 8th size violin. After watching her struggle and then eventually get the very beginning siren movement of vibrato, he took it back, going, that's easy, I can do that. And he could. Problem solved. Because Jing was willing to try to vibrate herself. Both of them not only had a better sense of the motion that Bronson was trying to create when he practiced, but they were able to practice better together as a team to learn vibrato. Now, before this pandemic struck, I would never have dreamed of asking any of my non-musician parents to do things beyond basic bowing patterns or basic fingerings. But now that it's become a regular thing in my studio, I think it should stay that way. In our role as online teachers, we are in a new and unique position to see where our students do most of their real learning. Dr. Suzuki talks in detail about the home environment and how it affects all aspects of the human being. He talks at length about one of his students, Koji. And one of the stories that he brings up about Koji is how he was orphaned. He lived with his uncle and came to Dr. Suzuki's house with some pretty rude behavior patterns that had been built in. Now, Dr. Suzuki could have scolded the child and admonished him and tried to nag it out of him, but he didn't. Instead, he asked his whole household to model their best, politest behavior. And within a very short time, Koji adopted all of their good mannerisms, and you would never have known that he had behaved any differently. Dr. Suzuki also believes learning begins immediately, not at age 5 or 6, when we get them. He writes, all children skillfully reared must start from the day of their birth, and gives many examples about how environment shapes their learned skills. For example, he talks about a mother who sings off key to her infant, and consequently, her child also sings off key. In another story, the infant listens to the older sibling playing Vivaldi A minor every day and listens to that book 4 record every day, internalizes the Vivaldi A minor concerto as her music, and later plays it very skillfully as a very small child. This illustrates his point of the importance of daily listening, but also the great influence of the home environment. Part of how we as teachers can help our students benefit from their online lessons is by observing their home environment, both in terms of distractions and also in terms of stress. Dr. Suzuki writes, I firmly believe that cultural and musical aptitude does not come from within and is not inherited, but occurs through suitable environmental conditions. He is, of course, referring to the listening and daily practice environment, but this can also be applied to the general home environment. For example, it is important in the practice space for that space to be quiet, calm, distraction-free. And of course, we all know this, but our students don't always have that sort of privilege or the knowledge that it should be their practice space. In our new voyeuristic online teaching role, we can more easily observe whether these conditions are being met at home and help the family achieve them. Right now, we are in the midst of a third world war. This one with a microscopic deadly enemy. I would be surprised if any teacher or family is not having stress of one kind or another on a daily basis. Dr. Suzuki himself lived through many hardships during World War II. However, he never failed to be kind. He never failed to be patient or to help others around him. As Suzuki teachers, we can model this same patience and kindness, helping to create a calm and nurturing environment for our children to grow. The best way we can do this is by helping our home teachers, our practice parents, continue to be the best humans possible. We can help our parents continue to be patient by giving them new, creative ways to practice, such as playing duet parts on any instrument they themselves happen to play, FaceTiming relatives for little concerts, or playing review songs for a stuffed animal audience. We can help them to stay kind, showing them how difficult mastering violin really is, while helping them learn the new skill their child is working on mastering. We can also simply take a few minutes at the end of a lesson to check in with our parents about their personal mental state, seeing them as humans, recognizing their hardship juggling work, school, and childcare without any respite, and celebrating all the small things their violin team is achieving each week. These all go a long way towards helping our parents give their kindest selves to our small violinists. As home teachers, they are the real key to this online learning. And as Suzuki teachers, our job is to be as kind as Dr. Suzuki, no matter what the circumstances are. And together, we can come through this pandemic as good human beings.
Thank you so much, Hannah. Thank you so much, everybody. Really, really wonderful. Oh, we have a question on environment. Excellent. So thank you, Janet. I will read it in case you're not looking at the chat. I'm a level 3 piano teacher. The online teaching has given me real insight into the quality of pianos my pupils are playing. I struggle with the balance between searching for beautiful tone and every child can learn, even those whose parents can't afford or aren't interested in buying a good quality instrument. Would really appreciate any thoughts. So anyone from the panel particularly would like to take this?
Yes, it's been very interesting, the lockdown period. First of all, as pianists, none of our students have access to the piano tuner. It's been interesting going into people's homes and seeing what they actually have. Some of them have ancient instruments, maybe a grand piano, which looks very beautiful in their salon, but sounds like a casserole, a pan. But yet, I think the only thing we can do as teachers is to at least have our instrument, and with online teaching to give them the best possible visual quality, because that's the only thing we can do. If the children have had enough lessons before the lockdown, they still do have the concept of the tone inside them. I just want to mention something because I had to do a lot of editing for a project on a very famous pianist, Eugene Easterman, and now it's on the website. But one thing he said was that when he radically changed his technique one time to try and solve a problem of painful fingertips, he decided to imitate Horowitz, who he'd had lessons with. It actually ended up perturbing his technique so much because Horowitz was unique. He was the only person who could play with flat fingers because of the way his finger joints had a special condition. So he went back to his normal way of playing. But he always used to say, as a proof of what he believed, he said, but you know, it didn't change my tone, because tone is a concept you have within yourself. And so it's the inner listening, and that if we've done that enough, that the child is capable of hearing, even, of course, if the younger the child is, the more sensitive they are, I think. And so if they've had that, enough of that at the beginning, are you making a nice tone? You have to give over to the parent. Oh, can you play for mommy? Can mama tell you, is that a good tone or not? But for the whole thing about instruments, we have to, if we're going to follow Suzuki philosophy and accept all children, we have to balance between telling them why playing on an electronic instrument is going to be terrible for them in the long run, and accepting those that really can't afford to do it for now, just to give the child a chance, but not to lose the goal. So that means they have to keep listening to good performances, to good pianists, to live concerts, until the parents get the idea of why it's important. So we can't totally back off and say, well, I'll just take anyone because it doesn't matter what they play in. It does matter. But at the same time, it's all, again, a question of balance. I hope that helps.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think this is a very pertinent to this discussion, and also it's something, Ed, when you had your first group lesson discussion between you and your colleagues, one thing that really struck me is one of your colleagues saying, of course, the tone that I hear is so awful, but of course at their end they are hearing the same tone they always hear from themselves. And I think that you know, it can feel like you're going through the motions to say, is it your most beautiful tone? Can you make it more, even better? Are you happy with it? But that's exactly what we do in our lessons, right? Is ask them to self assess and to improve it for them, not for us. And so this can still happen, even though what we hear might sound, in fact, yesterday it sounded like two violins playing, just not quite a perfect fourth apart, which was very unpleasant. But thank you for that question. I think it's a really great one. The next question we have is about the difference between the editions that somebody has read, the most recent edition, but not the first edition. And do you recommend reading that as well? Ed, would you like to take that question?
I really like this new translation, and Lily Selden is actually in this Zoom meeting. So at the risk of embarrassing her, I will just say that she was a Kenkyusei with me in Matsumoto, so in the early 80s. And then she ended up doing a doctoral degree at the University of Michigan in Japanese literature or translation or something like that. And her PhD advisor was, before he died, his PhD advisor was a very good friend of mine. And his PhD advisor told me, Lily Selden is at the top of the field. If you want to be a good translator, it's not enough to know both languages. You have to be, if you want to translate into English, you have to be able to write well in English. And Lily has it all. Lily is the one who's done this translation. So I just think it's beautifully written.
Thank you, Ed. That was far too kind. When my mother, Kyoko, when she and I were approached about translating it, I wasn't part of the initial discussion. So I didn't realize the urgency with which the request had been made. And I initially thought, well, why do we need another translation? Mrs. Suzuki has produced such a beautiful, eloquent, sort of intimate translation. And you know, it struck me as a beautiful text, and I'm sure lots of other readers, and do we really need a second translation? And so I was in no rush to co-translate, but eventually it was brought to my attention that, well, actually there are parts of the original the first translation, Mrs. Suzuki's translation, that have created confusion because some things contradict what other people have heard from Dr. Suzuki or from other books, and so if we could produce an English translation that that has been produced by people who really know Japanese and who really know English, which, you know, neither one was Mrs. Suzuki's native language, that would be helpful throughout the world, because then the English translation could be used to produce other translations into languages that haven't yet had the benefit of a translation that is directly from the Japanese into English by people who are bilingual. And you know, my mother and I as a team are the perfect bilingual team because she is the native speaker of Japanese and I'm the native speaker of English, but we're also highly educated in both languages. So you know, initially translating was very, very difficult for me because I loved Mrs. Suzuki's translation. And I felt like, you know, what can we possibly do to justify this translation? And then I did discover a few discrepancies where, because she had been relying on her Japanese tutor to help her understand some of the nuances of the text. Some kind of misunderstanding sometimes must have taken place between what the tutor understood the book to say and what Mrs. Suzuki understood from the tutor's explanation, what the book said. And there were also places where back in the 60s, when she produced the translation, translators often took liberties, right? They would add context to help, especially to bridge a culture, two cultures as different as Japanese and American or European. And so Mrs. Suzuki sometimes added sentences that were not in the Japanese. And they were helpful sentences sometimes, but we decided that our approach to the text would be to preserve, to make it very clear for readers what Dr. Suzuki himself wrote in the Japanese original, and where we as cultural translators, intermediaries, where we were providing additional information. So we decided to have a few footnotes. And so I would say definitely read Mrs. Suzuki's version to get that very intimate version of her sending out into the world from Japan what Dr. Suzuki was believing and professing and practicing. And then also, if you get a chance to to read this newer one, if you want to see where a slightly more distant objective translation might be. There are plenty of flaws. We didn't get to fix everything in the manuscript that before it went to press. So there's plenty of improvement for someday somebody to produce a third translation. But we did it with love and reverence and respect for Suzuki Sensei and Mrs. Suzuki both.
Thank you so much. And I really appreciate you just jumping in with no warning. Thank you. We are going to be in the breakout room for about 15-20 minutes, and I will give you a warning before you come back out, and then you will just magically pop out back here, and we can all finish up together. Did you want to share anything from your discussions, Ruth?
I think the main idea was, how do we keep parents and children feeling reassured, and take the emphasis off the kind of learning we may have done before, just into practicing kindness.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Keeping our children and parents in touch, even if they cannot even have lessons because they can't afford them right now. Somehow offering our hearts as Suzuki teachers so that they know that someone is thinking about them.
Absolutely. Hannah, do you have anything you wanted to share from your group?
We talked about practice parents and how playing violin makes friends for our children.
Yeah, nice. Sue, anything you want?
Well, thank you for putting the parent of one of my pupils in our group. It was so wonderful. Thank you very much.
Obviously, that was pre-planned.
We had Naomi and Margaret in there, and we came together and had some nice ideas, and that was very useful. Thank you.
Wonderful. You're welcome. Mara, did you want to share anything from your group?
Just really 2 words. I was so happy to see that not only before all together, but also in the little group then everybody looks so sincere. And that's one of the goals, in my opinion, of the Suzuki goal, to become good people. So wonderful.
No, that's wonderful.
Thank you to all of you.
I think to just wrap up, one of the reasons I wanted to do this was because I was on the Facebook group, which I think so many of us are on, and it's been such an incredible resource and really such a support and such a place of safety and help, technical help, emotional help, everything like that. And it's been so brilliant. And I did really want to focus our minds and my mind, and for Suzuki Hub, and I work with Suzuki in schools in London as well, and to really consider what we want our students and their families to look back on and think that we were offering them in this time. And for me, I'm very, very clear. I don't care if my students come back with a slightly less good bow hold, if they haven't learned any pieces that they didn't know before, if their tone has maybe is not so wonderful as it was last time I saw them in the room, because we can fix all of that. But what I really, really wanted them to feel is that Suzuki was a lifeline for them when they were in lockdown, and certainly when we first started, and it was so traumatic and we were all in shock worldwide. And for us to feel that violin or flute or trumpet or whatever it is was a place of fun and connection, support, engagement, and community, and that continued through this period. I just really want our families to look back on this and think it wasn't a battleground, but it was a haven. And so that's really what I wanted to reflect on in this group. And of course, that's what Dr. Suzuki would have wanted. I'm going to unmute everyone so that we can give our wonderful participants and also our presenters a massive round of applause, because it's just been a really, really wonderful afternoon. And now I realize I can't do that on the new Zoom. You have to unmute yourself. So thank you all so much. It's been really, really wonderful.
Thank you, Kate.
Thank you.
Kate.
Thank you, Kate.
Thank you to everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Hey, thanks, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you so much. Have a
Bye.
lovely rest of the weekend.
Bye.
Thank
I'm gonna
you.
pull the plug. Thank
Bye.
you.